Hello. If you wanted to find out why another white guy got into collecting vinyl, well, you've come to the right place. I'm Jason Klom, and this is Comedy on Vinyl. I am Jason Klom, this is Comedy on Vinyl, and these are the 7 albums that got me hooked. Now, full disclosure, obviously the name of the show is Comedy on Vinyl, the name of my podcast is Comedy on Vinyl, and every week we talk about a vinyl comedy record that was somebody's favorite growing up, or is a recent favorite. Sometimes we talk about an album that just recently came out that the person made every once in a while. And early on we did actually talk about stuff that came out on CD and to a lesser extent cassette, but since then I've stuck to the vinyl theme. However, my first records that I ever listened to, most of them, were not on vinyl. Actually, no, I won't say most, but the early ones were on vinyl. And these are 7 that I thought of that were instrumental in me even knowing what a comedy album is. You don't know what one is, obviously, until you hear one for the first time or presented with one. The first one I ever listened to was 1981's The Pick of Billy Connolly, which is a best of Billy Connolly stand-up, something my parents should not have exposed me to, but you know what? They did. And it's great. And it made me obsessed with trying to figure out how to do accents and kind of turned me into a mimic. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't be an actor in the same way that I am today, which is to say I do a lot of impressions when I act professionally. That's a huge part of what I do. So learning to imitate Billy Connolly's Scottish accent, trying to understand it, it was not an accent I was familiar with, obviously is not something I grew up with as a young, basically American little boy. Listening to that made me an active listener. And down the line, when we get to sketch comedy albums, which, they're going to be through a lot of these videos, but, once we get to Fire Sign, once they first come up, active listening is a huge part of that, too. It's really no different than me trying to navigate my way through a Scottish accent, something I'd never had to do before. It's a great album. Most of the stuff I talk about, I think, is going to be relatively family-friendly. That is one that, if you don't want your kids to hear dirty words, don't listen to it. I mean, he literally talks about marital aids. I didn't totally, that's not true. I mostly got the jokes. I mostly understood. I mean, like, he's got a whole joke about a sex doll and giving it a wee love bite, and then it farts and flies out the window, as he puts it. It's very dumb, but Billy Connolly is nothing if not delightfully childish. It's kind of a beautiful album. There's nothing on it that is hateful that I can think of off the top of my head. And when I say hateful, I mean stuff that most people will be like, "Oh, it's of its time." But I don't think there's anything like that on this record. So you'll notice I didn't hold it up. I don't have the Billy Connolly record, the cassette that I first listened to. I don't have it on vinyl either. It is actually that's a huge gap. I need to get that one. I've got other Billy Connolly records. I've got about 600 or 700 records sitting around, comedy records specifically. And weirdly, I don't have that one. I need to hunt it down. What I do have is the next one on our list. If I'm not mistaken, this might be my mother's copy, which was my grandmother's copy. I still have it somewhere. It might be the one that's on my record wall. So one of the reasons you're also not going to see me holding a bunch of the records in this video is I have a record wall of about 11 or 12 records. I can't count today. And this is definitely up there because this is a huge influence on me. So most of my influences are on the record wall. And this is no exception, but I do have several copies of this. This is An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May. This is directed by Arthur Penn, who you will know from having directed Bonnie and Clyde and a number of other things. But he gave us Gene Wilder, if nothing else, and he did give us plenty else. And I don't want to just talk about Arthur Penn, but I am fascinated because I dug a little deeper into him, into his background, into his life story. I'm a child. I'm an absolute child. You can tell why Billy Connolly really stuck with me. But he also went to Black Mountain College, and one of my mentors, Fielding Dawson, who was a beat poet, a beat author, that is, and an artist, also went to Black Mountain College. It was a big beat era college. And Arthur Penn gave us this. So it's a fun little mini connection. I won't say that I have any personal connection to it, but this is improv. That is to say, it started out as improv. These are tweaked and perfected, and this was a Broadway show, and it's brilliant. And this is we've talked about it on the podcast a lot, and recently other people have wanted to bring it up more and more. I won't say out of nowhere. It just happens to be people have picked it. This is only, if I remember correctly, 4 to 6. Total of 4 tracks on this whole record. This I wish this were in better shape, but it's a great gatefold copy of it. I can't show you everything, can I? Yes, I can. Haha, it's a widescreen camera, Jason. It's 2020. Yeah, so it's a delightful record. We do still, fortunately, have with us Elaine May, who, besides being one of the funniest people on the planet, and the best part of these records, I love Mike Nichols, but she's the best part of these records. She's given us some great screenplays, some underrated screenplays. She's been a presence, even if you haven't known her name, but you should definitely know her name, at the very least, for this record, and for Improvisations to Music, and for Nichols and May Examine Doctors. All three records are brilliant, and it is one of those things that, I don't know, it didn't teach me improv, nor teach me what improv was. I think I probably first learned what improv was loosely through what Christopher Guest did with Waiting for Guffman. That thing blew my mind and continues to blow my mind. But this was just another, I think this was probably telling me, oh, so improv was a thing before. Well, actually, I think I always assumed. I don't think I even realized how early this was in terms of improv being its own thing. This isn't even of the Second City School or anything. This is its own thing entirely. By the way, Elaine May would love to talk to you about it. She doesn't do interviews. She hasn't done one in 40 years, but I would love to be the first person she speaks with. That does not lead me to the next one. So that's 1960s. That's 1960s, An Evening with Mike Nichols. So that's 1960s, An Evening with Mike Nichols and Elaine May. 12 years later, George Carlin released one of the greatest, most influential comedy albums of all time. Now, I am a person who happens to love hippie George Carlin. I discovered comedy actually as George Carlin was becoming angry ponytail George Carlin, which we all understand was a character. It's just not a bitter character that I ever gravitated towards necessarily. I like hippie Carlin. I like older Carlin. I think his final album is actually brilliant. But Class Clown is peak George Carlin. It's the George Carlin everybody thinks of when they think of when they want to make fun of him or when they want to absolutely love him, the way I do. If you've never seen Rick Moranis do his Carlin, chef's kiss. It's beautiful. Class Clown was recorded roughly down the street from me. Not really down the street, 15, 20 miles away, in Santa Monica, California. It's so weirdly intimate for the large space that it's in. It's in an auditorium. There's a lot of people there, seemingly. And it's the album that has the 7 words you can't say on television. And it's got just so much of his typical, stories about growing up that are obviously exaggerated a bit, but they lead him into talking about religion, about sex, and, of course, most notoriously, about censorship. And it is, I don't know, it's a landmark album for that reason alone. It is, that track, the 7 words you can't say on television, obviously becomes a very huge issue with the FCC and gets him in a whole lot of trouble. And it ends up breaking the dam in terms of, breaking the dam. Ooh, that'd be a good title for a book about censorship. It probably exists. Put it up here if it does. If it doesn't, there you go. So imagine listening to that album when you're 15, 16, and somebody's saying, the same words that hurt can heal. It's a matter of how you pick them. There's some people that aren't into all the words. There's some people that have you not used certain words. There are over 400,000 words in the English language, and there are 7 of them you can't say on television. What a ratio that is. 399,993 to 7. They must really be bad. And ends an entire sketch with, you can prick your finger, but don't finger your prick. No. It is brilliant. Because you're always, as a kid, looking for an excuse to say whatever the hell you want at any given time. And he makes some brilliant arguments, obviously, as to why words are just words. I think since we have probably, expanded on that in terms of the philosophy of words and the philosophy of comedy, but I still think it is a relatively perfect record, and it hit me at just the perfect time. I inherited a lot of records that my mom had already inherited from her mother. Her mom wasn't funny anymore, so she gave if she ever was, gave the records to my mother, and then I got them from my mother, and they blew my mind, and I held on to them, and eventually that became the reason I started the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. However, the real, most succinct reason that I started the podcast is this next album. That's right, 1984's Weird Al in 3D, which is another one on the record wall. And I'm not taking it down because it's got a couple signatures on it, and I don't want to risk it breaking. None of those signatures belong to Weird Al. We'll get to that in a minute. But will we get to that in a minute? I don't know. But that is the album that my best friend and I became best friends over. It is the first album we discussed on the Comedy on Vinyl podcast, which, by the way, very quick disclaimer, do not listen to the first 2 episodes of the Comedy on Vinyl podcast. They are terrible. We literally sat around listening to a record and talked over it while it was playing. Thought it was a real cool idea. I don't know if we thought we were riffing. I don't know why we thought... I just want to say we. This was my idea. Eventually realized, listen to it ahead of time and talk about it later. It's embarrassing talking about it. Anyway, it is one of my favorite albums of all time. It absolutely holds up. It is Weird Al is one of the guys who exposed me to pop music and still is. He kind of makes those selections for me. I don't have to. I only listen to select songs that he picks. Although every once in a while I'm like, hey, I was paying just enough attention to get that. But yeah, I mean, I've never been hip in terms of music. And at the time, he was making one of the few things I did know. I mean, I loved Michael Jackson and other musicians that he parodied all the time. And my best friend introduced me to these full records. I didn't know they were records. I just knew there were a couple of music videos. And I guess I assumed that's all Weird Al did. He introduced me to this record and we just listened to it. Just the whole thing all the way through, and I was just like, whoa, it just blew my mind. And there are a couple other records that Dan shared with me, and we both got exposed to at the same time also. But this is the huge one. This is the big one, and it's the reason why I have it signed by Bermuda Schwartz and Jim Kimo West. It has not been signed by Weird Al, even though I have been in one of Weird Al's music videos. I've been background in a video that he shot years ago. And I also was in this. So this is from New York Times Magazine earlier this year. We shot this photo shoot around, I want to say January. There's just a ton of us there. And I am... Where am I? My head is cut off. It really stressed me out that it was cut. Well, it didn't stress me. Right there. The digital version had me in there, and I got to meet Al for the third or fourth time. He is the nicest person on the planet. And one of my great regrets, of course, is that I do not have it signed by Weird Al himself. One of these days. The next record, I also don't have signed by Weird Al. That's right, Weird Al's debut album. Now, this is one of the other ones that Dan exposed me to, because I know he had these, again, on cassette. Didn't have any of these on record. One of my favorite things about this record is some of the stuff it comes with. That includes this, which is an 8x10 of Weird Al Yankovic, in case you were curious what he looked like at the time. This is a promo, obviously, for DJs. But it also comes with this. And I've talked about this before on episodes. But this is a sheet telling you who Weird Al is. He's a 23-year-old accordion player, singer, and songwriter from Los Angeles, whose outrageously funny parodies of popular rock and roll tunes have already earned him considerable national attention. In 3D was the first one I listened to with Dan. This is one of the other ones I listened to with Dan. I love it. Both these two records make up... There are a lot of people who swear by Dare to Be Stupid, but these two ones just... They are pure for me, and they remind me of a certain time in my life. One of the big differences, though, between the influence that Weird Al had on me and Dan, who, by the way, is still my comedy partner 30 years later, one of the big differences between Weird Al and our other influences is that Dan and I didn't go into comedy music. We did, however, go into sketch comedy. We still do sketch comedy. We've made about 13 sketch albums, most of which are not publicly available, but that's a thing for a different time. But the real reason we got into that is the next album. That's right, Cheech and Chong's greatest hit. You see, a joke that I did not get until, I don't know, it was about 20 or so. It was just something that didn't occur to me. I had never used an illicit substance. I didn't even have a beer until I was 23. The characters and just the beautiful sound design, which, by the way, some of which was just Tommy Chong and Cheech Marin just going outside and recording on a portable recorder. Something I did not guess at all, because Lou Adler produced these albums, which is why they sound brilliant. I mean, Lou Adler, just a huge producer in music, got involved with the two of them to make their sketch albums, and he did send them out. Tommy Chong told me this. They went out with a recorder, recorded their own sound effects, and then just came back and put everything together with their very dumb, very simple sketches that I still think are brilliant. There's just a lot of great character stuff in there. Yes, there's plenty of weed jokes if that's what you're into. It's the reason I don't really care for the movies is the reason I like the albums. The albums have a little bit of variety. Even with the drug stuff, there's a little variety. And they're just really well-honed sketches. Very dense environments, almost Fire Sign level. I know that might seem like an insult to some people because people don't want to compare the two, but I didn't grow up with Fire Sign. So these were my first exposure to like really well-produced sketch comedy albums. And they're very dumb. I mean, that's one of the things that's obviously running through this list of stuff that I absolutely love, is that they're incredibly dumb records. And no exception is the final album on this list. That's right, the Smothers Brothers live at the Purple Onion. The full title, of course, is The Songs and Comedy of the Smothers Brothers, recorded at the Purple Onion, San Francisco. That is the full title. This record just means a ton to me. It is one that was passed down to me, along with that group of others, by my grandmother, through my mother. That sounded weird, but you know what I'm saying. It is one that influenced myself and Dan and our friend Mike, and Tommy Smothers. The character that Tommy Smothers did was very much a character that I could tell my friend Mike absorbed. It's a perfect record, and what's weird is it's an exception to what I was talking about earlier, is how Weird Al's influence is there, but it's not obvious because we don't do comedy music, and we don't do comedy music, but a lot of the Smothers Brothers banter has no doubt influenced us, and their grasp of character and their grasp of sticking to a character, and frankly, honestly, learning to argue in a funny way. I mean, one of my favorite things that Dan and I ever did together is a sketch that is literally a 7-minute argument. I think there's definitely something to that. Like, I think Python and the Smothers Brothers, if you want to listen to fast-paced dialogue, one of which is a little more tightly scripted than the other, Python's more tightly scripted, then you can't really go wrong with the Smothers Brothers and Monty Python. Dan and I were really big, especially in our early sketches, really big on conflict, and that's a huge part of comedy. People find conflict funny, and it all depends on how that conflict is laid out. And that honestly goes with everything that I've listed today, even stand-up. You can sort of explore what that means, but George Carlin is essentially having a conflict with society, because he's saying society is filled with hypocrites. Let's talk about this. So there are more records to talk about that influenced me that I will eventually down the line talk about, but I would like to get a few more out of the way that are a little more in the educational realm, at least telling you a little bit more about these records rather than just things that I like. But I did want to get these out there so people kind of understand why I'm interested in records and the ones that got me into it. A lot of this stuff is stuff people pick a lot on my podcast, which means I picked a lot of very popular albums to listen to and grow up with. So I only expanded my taste from there. But there's other stuff I'd like to talk about. I bet there are also albums that you would like me to talk about or expose me to. This happens a lot, especially if you're in a different country or of an entirely different generation, or you like a different type of comedy than you hear me talking about. Put that stuff in the comments. That would be great. I'd also love if you would subscribe and hit the bell for notifications, because that helps people discover the show. In the meantime, if you would, go to comedyonvinyl.com and listen to the podcast. We've got almost 350 episodes up there. As of now, we're at Comedy on Vinyl on Twitter and on Instagram, and on Facebook as well if you want to follow us there. But everything is at comedyonvinyl.com or the Stolen Dress Podcast Network website, which is stolendress.com. So I hope you enjoyed finding out the kind of records that got me into collecting comedy on vinyl. The only other thing I might recommend is going to danandjay.com. You can see the kind of comedy Dan and I have put together in the past. You can listen to that podcast. It's a complete ramble, though. It's a totally different type of show than Comedy on Vinyl, not an interview show. There are no rails to get off of. It's a little insane, but every once in a while we do some improv where versions of us from different alternate universes come in. So every once in a while that kind of thing does happen, and maybe you'll detect our influences. Probably not. So thank you very much for joining me, and as always, have a good thing. Stolen Dress Entertainment.
Hey, it's my turn. Ah!